When the founders provided a mechanism in the Constitution for impeachment, they were worried about what might happen if someone unethical took the highest office in the land and used it for their personal gain. And I think we need to consult our conscience and our constituents and decide whether that remedy is appropriate here.
House members are all back in their home districts this Thanksgiving week, where they have a chance to hear from those constituents, in some cases, whether they want to or not. Democrats are now trying to determine how to proceed on possible articles of impeachment, with the latest polling showing Americans remain split on the issue. With us tonight to talk about it, two of our returning veterans, Karine Jean-Pierre, Chief Public Affairs Officer for MoveOn, also an alum of both the Obama campaign and the Obama White House, also happens to be the author of the new book, Moving Forward, A Story of Hope, Hard Work, and the Promise of America, and David Jolly, a former Republican member of Congress from the great state of Florida, who has since left the House and his political party, but he's with us, so we win all around. Hey, Karine, I note the work of MoveOn, your organization, in the past. Are there plans to mobilize your organization into subgroups around impeachment, the way we saw on health care, and actually the way the right organized in the field at the birth of the Tea Party movement?
I'm so glad you asked that, Brian, because there is. We have folks on the ground in key districts and also in key Senate races where you have vulnerable Republicans, like in Colorado with Cory Gardner, like with Susan Collins in Maine, where we are going to be very loud and clear with our message. Is the President of the United States above the law or not? And so this is definitely very similar to what you just said, Brian, to the stopping the repeal of ACA. So we will be out there for the recess period.
So, Congressman, this is probably my weekly chance to ask you the same question, and that is, anything on your radar, anything of the known unknowns, the conceivable possibilities in this case that would change Republican minds?
I don't think in the House. I think we got an indication from the hearings over the past 2 weeks that Republicans are going to vote to a person to oppose impeachment articles. I think the Senate is still in question. And to Karine's point, some of those Republican senators who will choose to side with party over country will very likely lose their seats in the next cycle. And so, forecasting just a bit, what all of this may mean, the one political consequence is Republicans may lose the Senate in 2020. You may have Democrats controlling both the House and the Senate in 2020, which makes the race for the White House that much more pivotal, because this simple decision that has historic consequences could actually stack the deck for Democrats all across the board in 2020.
And Karine, back to your point again, I remember the look on Grassley's face at a town hall meeting when the Tea Party movement was coming up. These were folks to the right of him, and he was shocked by the volume and the anger of the crowd on a subject of health care. So I'm just remembering that degree of shock in an incumbent Republican from his right.
I agree with you. I remember that as well. I was actually working in the White House the first 2.5 years of Obama's presidency. And I remember those Tea Party kind of town halls, or they showing up at the town halls at many congressional districts and Senate town halls as well. Look, here's the thing, Brian. There was a poll that showed 70% of Americans believe that the President of the United States did something wrong. You can't get anybody to agree that today is Wednesday nowadays. That's how divided we are. And so that is what Republicans are going to have to deal with in some of these districts, in some of these states. Is the President of the United States above the law or not? And clearly some districts will have different conversations, but this is where we are. We do have people who are watching the hearings and are moving more steadily closer and closer to impeachment. And that's just the reality of the situation.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.